ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. Friends, Dr. Srijay, Devaraj Urs, Dr. Mishra, Dr. Chabra, Dr. Panini, Dr. Seshadri, and Dr. Shalini Urs, Professor Natraj, that I see here, Dr. Umapati, and the rest of the friends and students. It's good to be back at this very attractive and, in terms of academics, very well endowed center in Mysore. When Srijay asked me to inaugurate this panel discussion, I asked him who the others were on the panel, and when he trotted out these names, I requested him to leave me out of the inaugural part of it. Because these are big guns actually, and I know some of them very, very well. Nevertheless, this is the year when the government and a whole lot of others are observing the Devaraj's achievements here and so on. Devaraj's essentially focused on the socially deprived, even oppressed, and the excluded, in particular the SC, STs, and the OBCs. As understood correctly, that such deprivation and inability to demand change from the standpoint of politics alone, because they were poor, and as Dr. Panini said, poverty has its own internal logic. It can create a void in oneself and a complete lack of confidence. In argumenting, debating, let alone initiating any political program. Well, they had the vote, not the political power. As Dr. Ambedkar put it very, very well in the Constituent Assembly debates, the one man, one vote as a constitutional concept was perfectly okay, but the one vote, one value, or same value, was 1,000 miles away from Indian reality. Therefore, there was a dichotomy between one man, one vote idea and the inability of the same people exercising their vote but not being able to do anything else at the ground level. And he said, I have understood it clearly, but there's no way out at the moment. We accept it and move forward. So Devaraj has, in my view, innovatively thought of social engineering. That involved mobilization of castes other than the dominant castes. Clearly, whoever mobilized these communities or castes would have the authority to pick candidates in the elections, then try and get the votes required. It worked. He worked for several years, reached a position where he would pick the candidates. He had already mobilized these communities, the non-dominant communities. It worked, but he didn't rush on this. He didn't alienate the hitherto dominant castes. I think that is a terribly important lesson which contemporary politicians in India must really take note of. Indeed, he had very powerful, tall leaders from those communities, the two dominant communities, in the cabinet. That didn't prevent him from initiating social engineering process that he had so meticulously planned. He set up, I said he wasn't in a rush, he set up the LG Havanur Commission, and my friend Natraj worked very closely with him, I know. That was in pursuance of the concept of social justice, which wasn't used all that frequently those days, but was coming into usage. Devaraj Urs was a thinking politician. I would want to repeat that, because you see these days people rushing into things, typifying knee-jerk reactions, not just reactions, but decisions, and then regretting the decisions. He was so careful in everything he did, and the kind of fundamental change he brought about in the society of Karnataka, nobody else did. Nobody has done since then. He didn't lose any of his steam by that meticulous plan. So he had created a firm foundation, which, as a next step, could lead to economic empowerment, because he won the elections. He asked the question, what are the major tools of exploitation in India? Two major ones, there may be several other ones, but two absolutely crucial ones. Land and credit. Whoever owned land, whoever was in a position to lend money, lend credit, could control the strings of the life of people who borrowed. Land, of course, is even more important. There was also a third element which continues to an extent, even now, a tool of exploitation, that's culture. Culture. But that has also changed substantially now. In respect of land, Devaraj Urs used a very powerful expression, land to the tiller. He was also influenced, incidentally, by the left in India at the time. I still remember Devaraj Urs walking into the Central College Senate Hall. He was Chief Minister. He hadn't announced. Nobody knew. Kerala Chief Minister E.M.S. Namboodiripad was giving a talk in Senate Hall, and I was there to listen to him. Devaraj Urs just walks in and sits somewhere. You know, there was no fuss about it. EMS also didn't make any fuss about it. They proceeded business-like. Maybe they had a discussion later on, separately. So that's the kind of person he was. And the land to the tiller, he built up a mechanism at the ground level to document who actually tilled the land. Because the expression land to the tiller is attractive, but maybe fairly complicated in actually working out its implementation. He set up land tribunals, etc., etc. I think he was also influenced by Operation Burga, which was a fantastic move in West Bengal, and I had the privilege of witnessing that for over 4 to 5 weeks, going around villages, see what they did. And Devaraj Urs did it in a different manner here, but he was successful. While all this happened, there came Indira Gandhi's 20-point program, which fitted perfectly with Devaraj Urs' plan. And at the end of implementation of the 20-point program, for a year or two, there came the general election in 1978, which went like a song for Devaraj Urs. Out of something like 182 seats they won, something like 93 or 94 constituencies. Winners represented the SC, ST, and OBC, so what else did you need? Everything worked. That's why I said, it was a meticulously well planned. And he had that. He became the chief minister and proceeded to implement the Land Reforms Act, and various other measures, particularly the 20-point program. Those were the days of slogan poverty eradication. Although what was operational really was amelioration of poverty, not poverty eradication. We haven't eradicated poverty even now. The estimate right now, the UNESCO estimate, is that there are at least 300 million people in this country below the poverty line right now. That is the UNESCO estimate of last year. Okay. Those were also early days of the basic needs approach, and a very popular one. Economic development, or more accurately, economic growth, which people were talking about, were punctuated by the basic needs approach. That such nuances really didn't matter to Devaraj Urs, whose agenda was to unveil the real face of the hitherto deprived or subjugated, and also to give them a voice, and he succeeded in both of that. There are people who suggest there was really nothing like a backward class coherently defined in Karnataka until Devaraj Urs's program was achieved, because he brought them together. That's the social engineering part of it. He did that by, like a practicing political sociologist. You know, even academics hadn't really worked that out. Well, he did that. An absolutely remarkable kind of thing. That's why I said he was a thinking politician. I've been told by several people who knew him very closely that with all this work as minister and as chief minister, he still found time to read and ruminate on things. And every now and then discussed what he had read now with a few people. I mean, that's the kind of politician that you want, and want desperately now, everywhere in the country. The decades after Devaraj Urs have witnessed vigorous debates throughout the world, not just India, of economic growth with equity, inclusive development, and of development accompanied by economic inequality. That probably is the most recent concept, which is counterproductive since inequality is almost always associated with lower health and educational achievement. In other words, without bringing in the notion of inequality, any discussion of economic development, inclusive or otherwise, is not going to do very much. That's why Professor Dres and Amartya Sen analyze, as a non-economist like me understands it, economic development in a broad perspective. They analyze economic development in a broad perspective by locating both social and economic opportunities, a central role in the whole process. They argue, and I quote, "In focusing on social opportunities, we propose a perspective that is substantially broader than the narrow view that emphasizes promotion of markets and competition, as well as the similarly narrow contrary view that just wants to debunk liberalization." Both. And this was said as early as 1995. And they continue on that kind of an argument even now. Now, that is to say, in addition to reforms, one must go beyond liberalization for reducing deprivation and inequality. Some of you will remember the French economist Thomas Piketty was in India recently, a few weeks ago. Much discussed throughout the world now, especially in the West. He highlighted in a very major way, in a book called Capital in the 21st Century, potential damage of high inequality. And that was concerning the Western countries, but as he argued quite successfully here, and other people have endorsed his argument, his warning is valid for us in this country too. India, with 15% of the global labor force, can claim a growth record of substantial success over the last 2 decades, but it has not resulted in generation of employment. That I think is indisputable. Employment grew by a mere 0.5% during the same period between 2004-5 and 2011-12, a period that witnessed very high growth in terms of GDP, something like 8.5%. During the exactly the same period, employment grows only by 0.5%. Now, 92% of the workers still work in the informal sector. That's really a staggeringly high figure. Around 275 million workers, again according to UNESCO, live on $2 per day, i.e. below the poverty line. What can development mean to them is a question that must be asked and continue to be asked. A major challenge appears to be the mismatch between the skills required for the new manufacturing activity and the lack of such skilled labor. For example, Karnataka's economic survey of 2013-14 admits, frank, this fact. It says that most workers in non-agricultural economic activities now work in the informal sector, which means low levels of skills, low productivity, and low earnings. That's our own economic survey documenting that. And merely hopes, the government document merely hopes that the National Skills Development Mission of the Government of India would be able to help us out. It's not much of an analysis, is it? You know, what's the basis? But I don't blame the Department of Planning and Statistics, because they were not able to say much more than that, staring at the facts of the failure to generate employment. Now, with the recognition that inequality in economic opportunities and incomes can seriously affect non-income sectors like education and health, that's what I really want to focus on now. Non-income sectors like education and health, any ranking of Human Development Index can be misleading without reckoning inequality. For instance, India's HDI for 2014 was 0.609, ranking in HDI, 0.609. But when the value is discounted for inequality that's prevalent in these sectors, the HDI falls to 0.435 by nearly 200 points, a loss of 28.6%, simply because inequality in the distribution of HDI dimension of indices. What are the three dimensions of indices in HDI? A long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living. Those are the three indices. And because of extreme inequality in distribution of resources in these two sectors particularly, or even three, income is the other one, HDI in itself doesn't make much sense. Two areas or sectors adversely affected are, as I said in particular, health and education, recognized everywhere now as the central pillars of social development. Experience everywhere, including of course Karnataka and India, suggests that public expenditure just cannot be substituted with any format of private investment. If primary health, perhaps even the slightly specialized health service one notch above primary health, should cater to the bulk of our people, yet public expenditure as a proportion of GDP in India on health is one of the lowest amongst comparable countries. It's just 1.1% as compared to 2.4% in China and 4.9% in Brazil. Okay. The middle income countries. Inequality adjusted to HDI shows a loss of as much as 43% in education. That's really what should concern you and me. Whopping figure of 43% is the loss that we suffer when inequality is counted in Our HDI aggregate figure is discounted by inequality, 43% in education and 34% in health. So what are we talking about? Social development. You know. Karnataka, of the 19 states without inequality adjusted HDI, I mean just the aggregate figure of HDI amongst 19 states, Karnataka ranked 10th, which is not a very happy situation. And when income inequality was counted in, it ranked 9th. Kerala tops the ranking. Tamil Nadu is in the 5th place in the south. It's also an irony that Mysore, the home district of the Devaraj Urs, ranked 14th in HDI amongst districts in Karnataka in 1991, ranked 14th in 1991. Would you believe it? Now, in 2001, it stays at 14. Gap of 10 years, no improvement. That's our economic surveys figure, by the way. It's not my invention. Karnataka Economic Surveys admission. And the less said, the better women's predicament in health and education. Indicator of women's health have mostly been confined to fertility and postnatal care. You look at any statistics, our plan documents in Karnataka, they refer to these two main things, fertility and postnatal. We could have taken a lead in the development of other general indicators of women's development if only we had applied our mind and set up a specialized team to do that. There was a suggestion that Karnataka could actually have been a model for the rest of the country had we done so. You know, we didn't. We haven't, even now. I was greatly disturbed by a recent tragic incident, which apparently has been a recurring feature. I didn't want to mention this, but I have been so upset by that for the last 2-3 months. I have discussed with everyone in the government and elsewhere. Therefore, I thought it fit to mention it here. You know the Cheluamba Hospital in Mysore and the Vani Vilas Hospital in Bangalore. Okay. The two government-funded, government-run hospitals meant for women. Now, who are the people who go there? The poorer, absolutely the poorer ones who go there. 3 months ago, 4 months ago, I think, it was reported simultaneously from Bangalore and Mysore that women who were nearly 8 months pregnant who went to these two hospitals in Mysore and Bangalore, something like 10 to 12 women died both here and there. Okay? And on my inquiry, further inquiry, I found that this has been happening for some years now. It may not be the same figure every year, but it's been happening fairly consistently. But this time it was serial deaths of pregnant women in Cheluamba and Vani Vilas Hospital, right here in Mysore, Cheluamba Hospital. Now what do we do? Who are the people who go there? They have nowhere else to go to. You get charged 5 to 10,000 rupees minimum if you went into a private clinic or hospital. I'm sorry to be saying this. I'm not targeting any individual. If there are journalists here, I would especially like to tell them and appeal to them that I'm certainly not targeting. I'm not interested. It's very boring any longer to target individuals in politics. But there was a minister sitting in Bangalore who didn't think it fit to go to Cheluamba and Vani Vilas Hospital to find out personally what was happening. We set up a committee from the government and say we'll take action when the committee reports. God knows what action was taken thereafter. Now let me repeat, I'm not really targeting individuals. I'm not interested, absolutely indifferent in that. But there are issues which can't be pushed under the carpet just like that. And where else can they go to? You see in government hospitals even today, even in big cities like Dharwar and Mangalore, particularly women's hospitals, there's no place to sit there for pregnant women or women suffering from serious diseases. They have to stand there for 2-3 hours, even now. And you have seen some of the statements, at least 4 or 5 ones, by the new Minister for Health and Family Welfare, although these two hospitals, of course, belong to teaching hospitals, and therefore they were under a different minister. But Health and Family Welfare takes care of other hospitals, and I think government hospitals should have been 100 times more efficient, better equipped than they are now. I've seen these hospitals any number of times, the Victoria Hospital, the Bowring Institute, and so on in Bangalore. I think it's very, very disturbing. The new minister commented rather strongly, fairly harshly, and said he was carrying a bucket full of water with detergents and various other things. Why? To clean up government hospitals. I sympathize with him. I'm not criticizing. But it reflected the state of affairs. But I don't know if he thought while he made that statement, who will explain what this government has done, what we have done over the last 3 years then? If I should go around now to clean up these hospitals, meaning not physically clean up, even that is required, but the entire thing, you know, absenteeism, non-availability of drugs, ventilators not working in ICU, as happened in Chelwamba. And in the Chelwamba hospital, it was a heart-rending sight. You would have seen it in Mysore. A newly born baby was put into a commode. The Times of India, others carried the picture. You know, I think it's absolutely dehumanizing and shocking that such kind of things should happen. So I think the lesson is very clear. If you leave health to private sector, whatever be its glorious thing, private-public partnership, CSR coming in, corporate social responsibility, all of that is welcome. I'm not opposed to CSR at all. But there is no substitute but direct, proximate public investment in these sectors, in these two sectors. You cannot alienate that responsibility. Belongs entirely to the state, to anyone else. A few observations only on education. Largely as a result of my participation and visiting God knows how many schools, hundreds of schools in rural areas when I was education minister. Given the fact of its externalities and contribution to social good, education is, whether one likes it or not, a public good. Question is, can such a public good be harnessed for appropriate social needs by market forces? The same question as in the health sector, by market forces. Now, one isn't dismissing the market forces, like Amartya Sen and Jean Drey said, you know, that you need that. But to what extent and what kind of effective regulation can we hold on that is the only issue. If you don't do this, the state will have to play a central major role and not a retreat from its responsibilities. There are suggestions now, particularly in the last 2 years of the new government in Delhi, that the state is retreating steadily, but with absolute certainty in several of these areas. We know the examples. We're still short of teachers. Multigrade teaching is still prevalent in rural schools. We have some excellent activity-based programs like Nali Kali, but we need to train teachers over a continuing basis, and that doesn't happen, especially for rural schools. My experience of these schools, namely the rural schools, and their classroom transactions suggests that those children need to be encouraged to be more inquisitive, to raise questions in the classroom. We must de-emphasize our obsession with mere acquisition of literacy and numeracy, learning by heart, producing some answers in the do-or-die annual examination. which I keep calling a terrorist attack on students. I think it has paid no dividends. Much of the world is doing away with the annual examinations at whatever level. Continuing assessments, despite all its problems, an emphasis on learning rather than examination. We don't even use the word, Professor Mishra, as you know, we don't even use the word assessment. We call it examination. What examination? You know, you've heard of mass copying in the pre-university thing. And in the Cape, what's that? Public service examination in Bihar and in so many other states. I think we should get out of that as quickly as possible. The right to education targets set by that seminal legislation, an absolutely fundamentally important one, the Right to Education Act, are yet to be fulfilled. 2013, end of 2013 was the target date for achievement of several guidelines and so on. Not achieved it until now. Out of school children, over 1 million now. Yet again, UNESCO says over 1.5 million kids are out of school in the country. And look at Karnataka. I fished out some of the figures from my notes yesterday. November 2014, 1.67 lakh children were supposed to be out of school in Karnataka. 1.67, November 2014. The High Court said, of course, every matter goes to the High Court, as you know. From civic governance to education to health and everything goes to High Court. I don't blame the High Court. When we don't perform what we are supposed to do as the executive, the last resort is to go to the Red Building in Bangalore, the High Court, nothing else. And they have done a great job, I must tell you, the High Court. Whatever my colleagues might say in the legislature, the High Court has done a great deal. They said, we direct you to bring it to zero. Of course, they could only direct, but they couldn't implement. The department said 14,000 of the students were not traceable in 2015. Where did they go? Another survey was conducted in December 2015. The NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in Bangalore alone said there were 9,000 new dropouts in the city of Bangalore itself. The anti-child labor day was celebrated on June 12th, this last June 12th. They said we shall bring all kids into the school, but turned out to be a hollow promise. The dropout rate, the official claim, the dropout rate from class 1 to 8, by the time children reach the 8th class, is 20%. 20 out of 100 will just drop out by the time they reach the 8th standard. NCERT says the all India average of dropout, 45%, not completing the 8th standard. In Karnataka, my friends, the NGOs who actually work in the field of school education particularly, tell me, and I got it confirmed yesterday, that the dropout rate here may be around 40%. Now, we wrote a piece in one of the newspapers 10 months, 1 year ago, questioning the government's figures. Not to embarrass the government or anything, but you know, we have a constitutional commitment to give free and compulsory education until the age of 14. So it's a legal obligation. High Court and Supreme Court have endorsed this in what's called the rights approach to development. It's my fundamental right, etc. Now, Gram Panchayats and municipalities have been entrusted with the responsibility to make sure that there is no kid of the age of 5 or 5.5 which doesn't go to school. And when we interviewed several of these, they were not even aware of it, this obligation. So, I mean, it's a fairly sorry state of affairs, and I finish in a minute now. the right to education, as I said, is a fundamentally important one. It's a game-changing legislation of this country. I don't think we should undermine it. Now, several literary friends of ours, literatures, well-known literary friends, Sahitigalu anta karitare, they have come out with an argument over the last maybe 4 to 6 months. They say, look, when you admit children from the poorer families to neighborhood private schools, RTE provides for that, as you know, all of us know that now. 25% of children in a classroom must be from the neighborhood, okay? And the fees of those children of those families who are BPL families, below poverty line families, will be paid by the government. That's the arrangement in RTE. It works throughout the country. Now, it's supposed to be what? Something like 600 to 800 crores here per annum or something. The argument which several of these writers have made is that, look, why don't you plow this same money into government schools and improve the standard of infrastructure and quality, etc. There is nothing wrong in itself. Nothing wrong in itself, but they miss the essential point of the Right to Education Act. That's what I wish to suggest. I am worried about the reservations they have come out with, because, as I said, it misses the central objective of RTE of exposing children of both the better off families and of the deprived families to each other and to a common resource. And let me complete with this. I was greatly impressed with this. This is someone I had the fortune to hear him personally make presentations in seminars. A very well-known philosopher called Professor Kim Linker, who used to be at Oxford also for a while. This was published in 2002. And this man says, very relevant to right to education. He wrote about 15 years ago, you know, in that book, second edition, Political Philosophy. That was the title of the book. He says, the role of the national identity has remained strong in the modern era, in part because it emphasizes on the importance of the people, provides a source of dignity to all individuals, whatever their class. Please note, incidentally, that his notion of national identity is very different from the one that is being pushed by the NDA government now. It's a completely different thing. He talks about the people, not about a faith, Hinduism, Islam, or whatever. Okay? He says the role of the vernacular in modern political life is a manifestation of the shift towards a national identity. The use of the language of the people is confirmation that the political community really does belong to the people. What a statement. That the political community really does belong to the people and not to the elite. And while national communities still exhibit major economic inequalities, the different economic classes are no longer seen as separate races or cultures. It is seen as right and proper that lower class children are exposed to the high culture of literature and the arts, which itself has become expressed in the vernacular, while upper class children are exposed to the history and folk culture of the masses. All individuals within the territory are supposed to be exposed to a common national culture, speak the same national language in public, and participate in common educational and political institutions. So I really don't understand why we need to quib about 600 to 800 crores and forsake the Right to Education Act. There are a number of other issues. This may not be the platform or the time to address them, but Devaraj Urs, something which was very dear to Devaraj Urs. He was a man from the rural areas. After his BSc degree, he continued to cultivate, continued to be an agriculturist in the village, and until he was invited by somebody to join politics and Congress and so on. He wasn't at all keen on politics, from whatever I've told. And what was close to him was agriculture. And look at the miserable position today of agriculture is. What does development mean to people in agriculture? 73% of the people still live on rain-fed agriculture. And to provide them basic rural infrastructure in the country or in a state is simply impossible for any state government. I worked out with some friends in the Department of Agriculture and also University of Agricultural Sciences how much budgetary allocation we need to prop up agriculture in Karnataka, which would have the impact of preventing farmers' suicides. You know, there were 4,000 farmers committed suicide in Maharashtra in 2015. Over 1,500 in Karnataka. It's happening all the time. You know, we arrived at a figure of 4 lakh crores of rupees to provide adequate infrastructure, rural infrastructure, which will insulate the farmers from vagaries of market, vagaries of climate change and everything else. 4 lakh crores just in Karnataka. So we leave out Punjab, Haryana, etc., better endowed. That is the kind of money we need. I wonder what Mr. Devaraj Urs would have done that. We don't even talk about it. By now, there should have been a movement initiated by state governments demanding Government of India, whichever be the political party controlling the Government of India, doesn't matter, that Government of India should step in with massive funding for rural infrastructure. Nothing else was possible. Dr. Srijay Devaraj Urs, my modest suggestion at the very end is, in the new center that you are creating, and you're doing a great piece of work because no serious research is done in anywhere else in the name of Devaraj Urs, start a whole series of empirical investigations of the sectors and the values that concerned him. There isn't enough. Dr. Panini and Professor Natraj may agree with me. There isn't enough. Desperately short in terms of that information. All good wishes to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your views and insights on development and where we stand in terms of development today. It was a great learning for all of us. Once again, a round of applause